Your task in this video is to watch it and then copy what I write, except for the outline. So you're going to copy the prompt, you're going to copy my brain dump, and then you will copy the thesis. Then what you need to do afterwards is process and reflect on 2 things that you noticed about my thought process and that you want to try in order to improve your writing. And then also come prepared with questions. If you want to write them down, write them down. I'm not going to check and require for questions, but if you do have questions, I want you to ask them so I know how to help you. The more specific questions you have, the better. All right, let's get going. What's your prompt? Your prompt is, discuss the reasons Roosevelt issued his corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. So then the next step is to VST this prompt. And so the prompt is going to be, the verb is discuss, our skill is summarize and conclude, and then the important words from the prompt are reasons, TR, plus is what I did for issued, and then corollary and Monroe Doctrine. So we are focusing on the causation of why he chose to add this to the Monroe Doctrine, which many said was not used a lot, which would be great information to include in an introduction paragraph. After you do this, then what you will do is your brain dump. So this is what mine ended up looking like. And I just want you to see what it initially was, but I prettied it up so it was easier for you to copy. It's totally okay and normal for a brain dump to be sloppy and all over the place, especially because we don't have the time with which to really make it nice and organized. And so this is what my brain dump initially looked like. Me just jotting down all of my ideas, connecting it with arrows. Afterwards, I went through and highlighted so I could see the connections. On the IB exam, you won't be able to have highlighters, but you'll be able to number or use symbols or underline to find ways to piece it all together. So for my brain dump, I just want to make some important points about it. First and foremost, make sure that you're staying relevant to the time period. Since it's asking for the reasons why the Roosevelt Corollary was added to the Monroe Doctrine, with the Roosevelt Corollary being added in December of 1904, you got to make sure it's prior to that. Otherwise, it's not relevant. Then, how did I organize my brain dump initially? And I did do this on my sloppy one. I did set it up in this way, even if you can't tell. And what I did was, since we're focusing on reasons why Teddy did something, I started off with, what are Teddy's aims overall of foreign policy? What was he trying to do? And so that's when I started breaking it up into his big ideas. He wanted to purport the large policy through internationalism. He wanted to make sure the nation was secure, since that's what the nation wanted. And even though the nation wanted to be isolationist, he's going to find ways to ensure that national security while pushing for his large policy. And then another big aspect of his foreign policy is going to be civilizing the backwards corners of the earth, which is a part of progressivism. And so these are his 3 big aims that I identified, and then I provided examples of when it was successful, further explanation, and I also included historiography supporting each of these. Then what I did is, because this is specifically asking for his reasons for adding the Roosevelt Corollary, I decided to also write down what are the major causes of the Roosevelt Corollary and the major aims of them. And that is going to be supporting this idea from the original Monroe Doctrine about keeping Europe out of our sphere, or our sphere of influence, the Western Hemisphere. But what he adds is that we must keep Latin America responsible financially, because if we keep them financially responsible, Europe will not have a reason to intervene. And this goes back to Teddy Roosevelt's taking action before a crisis. And so then the last thing is, ultimately what he wants is no war because of debt collection. And so in order to ensure no war because of debt collection, we have to keep Latin American countries responsible, and then that will help us keep Europe out. He wants to actually back up the Monroe Doctrine, unlike the previous about 80 years that it has existed, since many historians and many people in general would say that it wasn't used until he dusted it off. So once you have your brain dump, you would then go ahead and VST, or add to your VST by outlining, which is what I did. I started finding those commonalities. I noticed that my 3 big reasons for why he added Roosevelt corollary are going to be wanting to expand trade, maintaining national security against Europe, and wanting to civilize the backward corners of the earth. And then what I would do is check, do all of these things, are they reasons Teddy Roosevelt added the corollary to the Monroe Doctrine? And I would go through and check the T from VST and find that yes, all of them do support it. I then added my evidences, which would come from my brain dump, adding further explanation of how those prove the reasons for the Monroe Doctrine corollary. And then last but not least, my conclusion, because I can't forget that, what do all three of these things have in common? Ultimately, what I find is that what Teddy's doing is enforcing the exceptionist beliefs of the American dominant influence. And he's going to do that through trade, through security, and spreading our influence to those who he sees as lesser. So this is my big idea, my big answer to my question. These are my 3 reasons that support it, and then all of my evidences that then support the whole thing, proving my point. And then I would get my thesis, which I would just plug and chug from my outline. Due to Teddy Roosevelt's internationalist desires to expand U.S. trade, proactive approaches to ensure national security, and altruistic goals to civilize the backward corners of the earth, it is evident that he added his corollary to the Monroe Doctrine to actually enforce American exceptionalist beliefs of their dominant influence. So that is how you can effectively use brain dump, outline, and then write. And so what you want to go ahead and do is make sure to have the prompt copied, the thesis copied, and then you can go back, pause on the outline or pause on the brain dump to get the brain dump copied. Just some major points about my thesis really quick. I didn't use the gerund technique. I used the blank to purpose technique. And then I used a lot of academic and content vocabulary. Hope this was helpful. Make sure to come up with those 2 points you want to make about my thought process in writing, and then also come prepared with any questions that you have.